Hi Chair, I can confirm we are now streaming.
Thank you, Tom. Morning, everybody, and welcome to our public meeting of NHS Herefordshire and Worcestershire and our Integrated Care Board public meeting. As everybody knows, we are live streaming. I also wanted to confirm that we are actually recording the meeting as well, just as a backup to make sure that that's available to us should the live stream fail, but I believe we are live streaming successfully today. So I just want to welcome any members of the public who are observing us today as well. We have received apologies from our partner member Sarah Dugan, and we are also have a couple of apologies from our participants Russell Hardy and Mark Yates. I think apart from that, we've got everybody present today. So declarations of interest. First of all, just checking that we have got any particular items that anyone wants to declare. Obviously, we have our register of interest, but is there anything on the agenda that particularly people wanted to declare an interest on? No, I'll take that as a no, so we'll just note the register of interest. Moving on then to item number 4, which is the governance log and including the board forward plan. I just want to check there, obviously it's for noting, but there is an action from the 21st of September meeting reference 13. I just wanted to check, Mary, that one was down for you, and I think it was about winter escalation. Could you just clarify the status of that for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So things have developed since we had that discussion. It's almost a national team. So we have to put in place by the 1st of December a system control centre with very clear points of escalation, processes, policies behind it. So we're currently working to get what we're calling the standard operating procedure agreed and signed off with all partners, ready to deliver a system control centre that will be part of the escalation, the biggest escalation process we have in our ICS for the 1st of December. I'll be happy to share that with anyone once that's signed off and agreed with everyone, which we're planning this week. That will be happening, and it will make it clearer the current escalation process.
Great, thank you very much. Okay. So there's that action, and obviously receive the document once it's been concluded if people wish to do that. Happy to close that action? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Moving on then to item number 5. Oh, Paul Walker.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Christian. I just wanted to check on the forward plan. Simon and I have been talking about the full service inspection of children's services, which has been completed in Herefordshire, and there's an item to bring that through to the board itself. I know we talked about some options for dates. I just wanted to kind of see if we could get that on the forward plan in the next 1 or 2 meetings, please.
Okay. Hannah, Hannah or Simon, how do you want to pick that up? I'm sure we can review that in the forward plan. Is there an ideal timing, Paul? Just thinking about.
I mean,
Simon?
It's.
Yeah, Paul. I think. We've got children's services deep dive on the agenda today, which is deliberately designed to be high level. What I expect when we have that conversation is we'll pick up some specific threads, one of which will be the particular inspection and improvement action in both counties, actually, but particularly for you. So I'd expect we're going to be revisiting the detail of this again, if not in January, then definitely in March. So it's a good reminder from Paul that we'll build that in, Christian, for the forward plan for one of those meetings.
Yeah, I think January is probably preferred. We'll then be able to bring forward the inspection report and the outcome of the Commissioner's recommendation to the Secretary of State. So that will bring those two together. So that will complete it. It's probably best timing in January. Thank you.
Okay, we'll aim for that, Paul, and make sure we have an opportunity for a report back. So we'll note that as part of the plan, and certainly review the forward plan to make sure we can accommodate that. Thank you, Paul. Okay, so I think we've dealt with the actions. Any other comments on the forward plan before we move on? I mean, it's there really to signal where we're going to focus. Put some of our focus, particularly on the deep dives, and really to demonstrate that we are going to be covering a range of different deep dives, so that, you know, we're looking at all the aspects of the care that we provide to our communities. Okay, well, we'll note that and note the update from Mary. So moving on then to the minutes of the previous meeting, which is item number 5. Can I just check if there are any points of accuracy that people wish to raise? David Whiteman?
Yes, it's only a very, very small point, but Dr. Catherine Cobain is listed as KC in the actions, but KB on the first page of the minutes. It took me a couple of minutes to work that one out. So she should be KC, I think, on the first page.
Well spotted, David. Thank you very much. We'll make that amendment. With the exception of that, is there any other point of accuracy? If not, can I take it that the minutes are approved as an accurate view of the last meeting in September, with the exception of the item that David has highlighted, which we'll note. Okay, thank you very much. So the minutes are approved. We move on then to the next section of the meeting, which is patient public voice. We have, first of all, questions from the public. We do have a question from Trigger, who is a Worcestershire patient. And first of all, that single question we have received is, what steps are being taken to improve flow through Worcester Royal Hospital from A&E to the wards? And I think, Mary, you were going to respond to that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was going to make a start. I can see Matthew's joined us. He may want to come in. So there is, as we all know, urgent care and flow is quite a complex piece to improve. But we do have 4 key areas that we have now agreed are our priorities to improve the urgent care and flow system through Worcestershire. 2 of them are directly related to this question, which is improving flow from the Worcester A&E to the wards. One is, we recognise that early in the day discharge is the biggest challenge in Worcester. It's the one thing on our KPIs that is causing concern and is leading to delays from moving patients out of the ED. So we are, from Monday next week, in an integrated way from health, social care, the Health and Care Trust and the acute, putting into the Worcester acute site a command and control centre around discharge. They're going to name it something different, but that's in effect what it is. That starts on Monday to make sure that our discharges are early in the day. We're pre-planning discharges in a more effective way, and also analysing each step in the pathway for flow and discharge and taking out unnecessary steps and making it a leaner process. So that will start on Monday. I'm sure there'll be a lot of work, a lot of learning in the first 2 weeks to implement, but we need to implement at pace the changes to improve the position. That is key. We've also agreed across the Worcestershire place-based system discharge targets for simple and timely discharges, those discharges that don't need any care going out of hospital, but also for the complex pathways. And we'll be monitoring very closely hour by hour delivery of those targets to ensure we have. The other key aspect is the push model, the making sure that patients are pushed out of the ED as quickly as possible to the assessment areas of the wards. And some actions that we've taken, we've increased the capacity in people to help to move those patients more speedily. So we've used some of the winter resource that we've been given to help the acute trust to enhance the resource they have in people to make it happen more quickly. Now, that is, this is being it's called something across the whole country now. It was called the North Bristol model, it's now called the push model, and a lot of the country, as well as Worcester Acute, are undertaking this process to try and free the EDs up as quickly as possible. I could go on for much longer, but that's the two main aspects, and we're picking up some more of this in the QRD report under the urgent care section.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, indeed. I think those sort of actions are outlined in the report that follows at item 12, but helpful in response to David's question that we outlined the key steps that have been taken in relation to flow. Thank you very much. So we move on then to item 7, which is the patient story. And I'd like to invite Kath Cobain to share a patient story with us. Kath.
Thank you, Chair. This is the story of Rachel. This is a particularly sad story about Rachel. Since an early age, Rachel had suffered from epilepsy, which had been managed by medication. Her epilepsy had, however, impaired her cognitive ability to manage her care independently. Epilepsy is one of the most common significant neurological disorders in children under 19, and we know that there are about more than 1 in 220 children have epilepsy, approximately about 1,000 children in our integrated care system. What was not always recognised by professionals working with her was her impaired cognitive ability. In June 2017, when Rachel was 15, her behaviour became extremely challenging and she became a looked after child under a voluntary agreement between the local authority and her parents. Rachel was initially placed with foster carers, but more latterly resided in semi-independent living arrangements. Over a period of time, there were numerous occasions where Rachel was reported as missing from these placements. There were concerns regarding Rachel's vulnerability and in particular the management of her medical condition. There were also concerns regarding Rachel's relationships with men who were older than her. Rachel was considered at risk of being criminally and sexually exploited. In summer 2019, when Rachel was 17, she suffered a seizure, was conveyed to hospital, where shortly afterwards she sadly died. Following her death, the Safeguarding Children's Partnership undertook a review in accordance with the Working Together 2018 statutory guidance. The review identified 2 main areas for Rachel's care that could have been managed better. The first was her medical condition and how this was recognised and managed by professionals, in particular when she became a looked after child. Rachel's epilepsy was being managed by the medical team. They prescribed her medications, briefed the social worker and outreach worker on the need for a consistent medication regime and the risks of this not being complied with. What was not clear is who was responsible for monitoring this. This came to light during the review when it emerged that Rachel hadn't been requesting her prescriptions for her anti-epilepsy medication. Therefore, although her medical condition was under the care of the appropriate medical teams, the absence of associated ongoing monitoring meant opportunities to recognise Rachel's poor adherence to the regime were missed. There was significant learning from this, and there has, as time has passed, significant amount of time has passed, there have been things that have been implemented, and there is much more to do as well, it's fair to say. So where there is a looked after child with significant health needs, a consistent health professional link has to be identified to bridge the gap between pharmacy and GP surgery and other professionals. A series of electronic patient alerts is being trialled with a number of GP practices, which links to pharmacies in each of the sites to identify if prescriptions have not been requested. And if successful, this will be rolled out across the system. These alerts in turn trigger follow-up with the young person to discuss compliance and make referrals signposted as appropriate. And these alerts have also been expanded to include children and young people who take asthma and diabetes medications, as well as anti-epilepsy medications. The second finding of the review was on how agencies had not worked together to identify and manage Rachel's vulnerability to sexual exploitation. Rachel was at risk of criminal and sexual exploitation, which the review identified was not always recognised by all the agencies involved in her care in a timely manner. Again, very significant learning, and quite sort of excitingly, a multi-agency programme called the Get Safe programme was introduced in 2019 as a true multi-agency programme. The Get Safe programme is an innovative and child-focused approach to tackling the many forms of criminal child exploitation. Get Safe enhances multi-agency processes for the identification, assessment, planning and response to this problem based on a contextual safeguarding framework, looking at how we can best understand the risks, engage with children and young people and help keep them safe. There was bespoke training across the multi-agency workforce in relation to child exploitation, and there was the growth of a network of services that support children and young people at risk of exploitation. This was working with the police and crime commissioners, diversionary services, local community safety partnership provision for young people, third sector agencies and charities, and early help offers with children and colleges. Guidance has been developed for professionals, subsequent guidance has been developed for professionals working with Get Safe risks and or vulnerability for young people aged 16 to 24 years, so bridging that period into adulthood in the Get There programme. So I think this really represents a truly system-wide response, but still, as you'll appreciate, further work to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kath. Are there any questions or comments from colleagues about that story? Anita?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kath. I mean, what a really sad story, and it, you know, as you've highlighted, lots of areas where things broke down. Right at the beginning, however, you mentioned that by mutual agreement, she became a looked after child. How comfortable are we that the parents in that situation had the support available to them, that perhaps that might, because you sort of feel that that might have been sort of a critical step on that path. Are we comfortable that the parents who are dealing with challenging children do have the support they need, that perhaps that decision would not have been taken? Thanks.
Thank you, Anita. Kath, is that something you feel you can comment on?
Probably partially, Chair. Obviously, not to comment on the individual case, but thinking about, you know, and thinking about the end of the story there by looking at the early help processes that are in place, and making sure that we have the systems and in place to support, you know, children and families and support them staying with their families. So I understand that is the approach of our local authorities, and I'm wondering if like either of the Pauls would like to come in on that, obviously, as they support the children's social care services.
Thank you, Kath, and Paul Robinson would like to comment. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely. I can absolutely give the assurance that we, wherever possible, do not bring children into care. But there are some instances where families are really struggling to cope and they're actually asking us if we can help. That's really the only basis, unless it's a real concern about risk. We have a system that is absolutely risk-based. All of the data shows that where possible, if you can leave children in their family situation, their outcomes throughout life are much, much better. So I don't know the individual case, but absolutely our approach is that we would be really reluctant to bring a child into care because we recognise the impact that has on their life chances. And so in this, you know, in any particular case, we would be balancing that against what we're being told by the parents and obviously safety and risk concerns. So yes, I can give you that assurance.
Thank you very much, Paul. I can see we've got a few more questions or comments, and probably Paul Walker. I'll bring Paul back in at the end, but Nikki and then Nigel, please, first.
Yes, it is a very sad story, but I think it's sort of, we could look further back, nearer to the beginning, maybe before things became that extreme. And I think what we see in primary care is a lot of families need help a lot before this stage is reached. And I don't think the amount of help that people need really is out there. So I think we need to work at the earlier stages more for families, and this is something I think the PCNs are starting to look at, the primary care networks, about the wider offer to families, because there is the early help offer, but people often don't meet the threshold soon enough to get the preventative work in, and then by the time people have met the threshold, things are too far gone, and the work hasn't been done at a preventative stage. I do think there's more to be done. I think we need to do more in the primary care networks to get people started earlier on the right footing, before things escalate to become more severe. Absolutely.
Thank you, Nikki. That's really helpful. Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to raise one small point related to the high-risk patients, if you like, disengaging from treatment or support, and that might be a wider problem, not just focused on a particular illness. So I think our systems generally don't pick up people who disengage with and follow them up actively, and I think any learning from that pilot and any IT solutions which could facilitate that, there may well be a much wider benefit to a whole range of vulnerable people who might disengage for a whole lot of reasons, and actually proactive follow-up of those would be a really valuable thing for us to develop.
Thank you, Nigel. Is that something, Kath, you think the pilot can consider?
Absolutely, I think, and I suppose that's the point of the discussion, isn't it? To think about, like, obviously this has been in a specific case and a specific, but I think, you know, it's then looking at then the wider implications of that. So I think that's an excellent point, Nigel. Absolutely excellent.
Great, thank you, Kath. And finally, Paul Walker.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and I think to follow on from what Paul Robinson has said, you know, our focus is on the family in the first instance, and very much supporting the family, and with a feature very much around early help and how we can bring that to the fore. The last thing we want to do is to be taking children away. It is very much around a risk-based scenario. But in terms of the opportunities missed, you know, that's about good case management and oversight. You know, that'll be a feature of both the work that's happening at Herefordshire and Worcestershire. There are always improvements that can be made, but you know, the strengthening the case oversight, the concept of early help and the focus on the family is where we are focusing our efforts and work at this stage.
Great, thank you, Paul. So I think that's been really helpful, Kath, and sparked something of a discussion about sort of as you rightly said, the wider opportunities for learning. And it seems sort of clear that whilst there's already been some good learning identified, the opportunity to think how we move things more upstream. You know, we talk about Nikki's point and Nigel's point about sort of prevention and early intervention remains absolutely key, and for us collectively how we work together to do that. So it'd be really helpful if we could explore that further. Thank you, Kath. Okay, we'll bring the section on patient public voice to a close then and move on to our strategic update. So we first of all have item number 8, which is Chief Executive Report from Simon. Simon, do you want to just highlight any key points?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and hopefully everyone has had a chance to read the report that is fairly eclectic and varied this month, and I apologise for that, but it probably does demonstrate the breadth of the work that the team are involved in currently. Firstly, an ask, so we're being asked to sign up to the MENCAP Treat Me Well pledge. Many of us would have seen the Panorama programme last month that highlighted some of the deficiencies in care for patients with these types of needs. I think it's a really good thing that integrated care systems are being asked to make a pledge like this, and I would recommend to the board that we commit to that. Just in terms of the rest of the report, page 2 and 3, lots of activity and information around both winter planning but also emergency planning. So we have clearly the prospect of industrial action, which is quite a real prospect, I think, for health and care services during the coming months, and also the prospect of potential interruptions in power supply, which may be not quite as certain to happen as the industrial action, but equally is good practice that we are running exercises with partners to try and make sure we are prepared and we would understand how to cope in those instances. So just some assurance from the board around the activity that is taking place in those areas. I would then probably draw people's attention to page 6 and 7 of the report. So we have these strategic forums in our system governance that play an absolutely critical role in just making sure partners are on the same page with key issues. So they're not really decision-making forums, but they are discussion forums where we use the opportunity for all partners to be aligned in both their understanding of the big issues, but also their alignment of efforts to try and put solutions in place. A particular activity this month that I draw attention to is the point prevalence work that I know comes in the next report on the agenda today, but the Finance Forum have been heavily involved in overseeing that really important work. Page 8 of the report provides an update on the variety of delegated commissioning activity that we are planning to undertake under direction from NHS England. So a critical few months ahead for that work, particularly around the due diligence work around the finance and the budgets and the workforce capacity and expertise that would transfer with it. So we're getting close to understanding a lot more about the detail of that. And then finally, Christine, I just draw attention on page 9. We're asked to keep a handle as a board on temporary service changes. So there were a variety of services that changed temporarily during the pandemic and for a variety of reasons have remained amended from their previous pre-pandemic state. So you'll see on page 9 of the report there's a short list of those, just so the board are aware of the current situation with those services and kind of what's happening to try and restore full service provision where possible. So very happy, Krishni, to take any questions on either those items I've highlighted or anything else in the report.
Thank you, Simon. So any comments or questions? Bringing in Nigel Fraser.
Thank you, Simon. That was a very useful run through. Of course, the Treat Me Well pledge, I think we would probably all agree that there's little to argue about that. That seems like a very positive and proactive pledge to take. So I fully support that. Just bringing up on a couple of other points in your update, the NHS 111 changes. Clearly the service is changing to its new provider. There's going to be a delay. For me, the 111 service is a critical resource in directing people through the urgent care system. And I just wondered whether there had been any movement on getting more local clinical involvement to try and make that more efficient, because it allocates an awful lot of resource outside of our control. Out of our direct control, and this can have big impact on some of the things which are really affecting us, like ambulance transfers, etc. So I think that's a really key area for us. And the other bit, I just wanted to highlight the primary care performance section, as you would probably expect. I think that is very good news. I think we should, however, put that in the context of we have a worse than average demographic retirement bubble coming up in our primary care, and that the challenge for us, we're operating at some of the top levels in the country as far as GP access. It is probably more to do with trying to maintain that as we go through that demographic bubble, would be my observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. So it's probably something we can pick up. We certainly wanted to talk about more primary care access more fully, and it's featured in our forward plan. So it's perhaps something, the workforce element of that, Nigel, which is what you're highlighting, is probably something we should pick up as part of that sort of feature focused item. Simon, do you want to respond on the 111 point that Nigel raised?
It's a really good point, because 111 over I think we've probably had it for nearly 10 years, haven't we? Certainly 7 or 8 years we've had 111. It's become a really important tool for the public in particular to navigate health services. We understand, don't we, as Nigel alludes to, just how critical it is in allocating resources in terms of appointments and access to services. It's really important that that is locally influenced. Just worth bearing in mind with this particular service change we're undertaking, this is an emergency service change because the current provider, WMAS, have decided they don't want to do it anymore. So they've had to provide, the regional team that oversee this for us have had to find another provider willing to step in to provide the same service model. What Nigel alludes to is the absolutely critical development work that needs to take place around the service model itself. But just to be clear with the board, this particular change, it isn't a service development, it is a transition of one provider who's handing back the contract and us needing to find another provider who's willing to continue that for continuity purposes. Clearly the developmental work needs to go on, and as Nigel describes, the role of local clinicians in being part of that allocation and direction of resources is going to be really important. So I'd expect us to be working a lot on that next year once this transition has happened and things have settled down a bit.
Great, thank you, Simon. Okay, there's quite a lot of comments or questions to come in still, Simon, so we'll just work through those. So next we have Graham Hodgson. Graham?
Yeah, thank you, Krishni, and Simon. I'd add to your comment, a great report. The amount of contingency and emergency planning, I don't think I've ever seen such a scale before, and on so many different areas. What caught my eye, Simon, was the items on potential strikes, and a comment that you had in there, and it may have been overtaken by events, about the Royal College of Nursing potentially being on strike on the 18th of November. And I was just putting myself in a patient's shoes and thinking it must be incredibly stressful and worrying for patients at this time if you had planned treatment or current treatment, undergoing current treatment. So I just wondered, without a great deal of detail, what kind of plans are in place for actually communicating with patients, and how would that work?
Yeah,
Simon,
yes.
Can I just pause you before you respond, but don't lose the thread? I'm just conscious that if there are other questions about the potential strike action, it might be useful just to bring people in specifically on that, because just in case there's anybody else who wanted to come in on that. So was anybody's comment relating to that, or is everybody wanting to come in on different things? Okay, no, it looks like it was just to Graham's point then, Simon.
I mean, at the time of writing the report, the 18th was mentioned. We don't have any information to suggest there will be a strike on the 18th, which is good news. I think the other information we've had subsequent to the report being published was the local results of the RCN ballot, which came through, I think, on Friday last week. And the results of that were that nursing staff in Herefordshire and Worcestershire Health and Care Trust and Worcestershire Acute Trust voted and met the threshold to be able to undertake strike action. Nursing staff in Wye Valley Trust and in the ICB, because we have got RCN members in the ICB, didn't either vote or meet the threshold of participation that would enable legal strike action to take place. So, good news that it's not all of our system. but clearly 2 of our main 3 trusts will be subject to this strike action. I think, Graham, your point around communicating that to patients is absolutely critical, and I know even the nurses that are taking strike action, that will be paramount in their thoughts. They are well within their rights, aren't they? And people will have their own views about supporting the strike action, but I know every nurse I know will want that to happen in as manageable way as possible and the impact on patients to be as little as possible. So that will hopefully be with plenty of advance notice. In some cases, alternative arrangements through the use of other health professionals and maybe even doctors will enable service provision to continue. In some cases, it will require, I'm sure, clinics and services to be paused during the strike action. Katie is working really closely with the other HR directors across the system, and it will very much be a system-wide activity that we prepare, plan, and then respond to strike action as and when it takes place. And actually, the RCN, the Royal College of Nurses, is the first professional body, and we do expect, I think, there to be several other professional bodies who also agree to vote and agree through an election, through a democratic process, agree they want to take strike action. So I suspect this is going to be another theme of the winter and the coming months ahead, that we will have to find a way of organising services in as safe a way as possible to protect patients, but also, as Graham alludes to, communicate that effectively so that everybody understands what's happening.
Thank you, Simon. OK, Paul Walker then next, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on Nigel's point about 111 and the kind of recognising that we're in a transition from one provider to another, but the extension of that transition phase. And I think for me, it's just the kind of assurances that we have around the resilience service that are going to be undertaking that transition to be able to continue to operate at the level we require and allocate resources and do what we need to do during this extended period.
Thank you, Paul. Simon, do you want to come back in on that?
I think that's a really good challenge, and it's very hard to be totally assured, isn't it, in these instances? If you remember, I think the original transition date was October, so we're already a month past that. We're now looking at the end of March, April. There is a lot of work to do, and of course for the staff working in that service there's a huge degree of uncertainty. This is complicated by the current provider is West Midlands Ambulance Trust. A lot of the staff involved in currently providing the service also manage the 999 call assessment, triage and allocation process. So it isn't the case of just being able to ring fence a bunch of staff and moving them across, and that's what's proving the delay. That the Ambulance Trust actually are saying there's a whole load of these staff, we don't want this contract anymore, we don't want to provide 111, but we want to keep a good chunk of the staff because we want them to handle 999 calls instead. So the risk is the new provider doesn't inherit a workforce that's able to do the job. So the delay is really the new provider trying to organise new appointments and new staff to be able to provide sustainable services on day one. I think the assurance I would give is this is heavily scrutinised at national level, actually, not just locally, and I'm sure nobody will be involved in authorising a transition until there is a safe destination and service model to receive this. So yeah, I'll keep the board updated as to that, but it's something we do need to watch carefully, and Paul's very right to highlight a very real risk about it, because it's, you know, it's unplanned and it's complicated by the relationship with these other services as well.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. So the delay is sort of really part of, you know, a response to trying to make sure that transition happens as smoothly as possible. David Whiteman.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, a question about the East Kent maternity report. You've written in the report that all partners will need to reflect openly, honestly, and with candour on the issues raised. I wanted to ask you whether there'll be a more formal review process to make sure that as a system we are incorporating those learnings and acting on them.
And Simon, just if I can add something to that, I suppose linked to that, the question it prompted me, I mean, obviously we had the Ockenden compliance actions, and I suppose the reflection for me was, does the East Kent, or is there an intention that East Kent sort of sets an additional set of compliance actions that that are needed? So I think it was just linking those two things together for me as well. So I don't know if Simon, can you come back in on that? Or
I might bring Kath in. I might bring Kath in a sec. But we were fortunate, David, to have a really good local maternity system board, which Matthew Hopkins chairs actually, and Kath and various others work with. Louise Bramble chairs it now, doesn't she, actually, Dr. Louise Bramble. So there's a really established system-wide maternity network, which gives us a great route of ensuring consistency in understanding and application of these learnings. But Kath, was there anything you wanted to add specifically to David's point around the relationship between East Kent and Ockenden and the various assurances we need?
Yeah, absolutely, Simon. Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think lots of people have been asking that question. It's a really key question, and I think that the Dr. Bill Kirkup East Kent report really interesting in that it's not going to be having essential actions after it. It's 4 sort of broad categories, and which you could transfer to other areas as well, absolutely, as Simon has said in his report, but not expecting large spreadsheets. And most of those actions are covered, well, all of those actions in fact are covered within the Ockenden actions, so we focus on the Ockenden actions as well. I think it's an interesting reflection. It's quite sort of summarising, I think, really where the Ockenden findings were going to. Thank you.
Thanks, Kath. So it's sort of more a reinforcement of what we already needed to do in effect through Ockenden. Thank you. Jane.
And another point, but just in relation to East Kent. I mean, it has all become very complex, which I think was your point, David. We've got everything from Morecambe Bay to Ockenden to a whole range of things. There's going to be a Nottingham one that comes out soon, and certainly, I mean, what we're doing is we're pulling that together into something of a single action plan. There's also CQC reviews and all sorts of things which are all relate to maternity services. So I think sort of something of a single plan by provider, because the issues will be different, and of course there'll be similarities, and the standards need to be, the outcomes need to be the same, but what we need to do will end up being different. So I'm just reinforcing your point that it is coming in from all angles around maternity, and we have to stay focused on what the important things are rather than responding to each tiny bit. What I put my hand up for though was it was just really looking through the strategic forums, and I guess it's making sure we're truly strategic on them. And I think obviously quality resources one has got, is still at very early stages. Others have been there for longer. My point really was about the People's Forum though, because just going from the report, it looks really very operational. And so I think in terms of making sure we've got the things that are properly strategic, that only the ICB can do, that will add value, as the focus for that, because there's all sorts of workforce problems, and it's quite easy for us to get dragged down, I think, into the operational and tactical issues, which I'm not sure can genuinely be influenced. So if we take just one of the examples there, the haematology service, I don't think there's much value that can be added in a strategic forum, because actually the issues are much more tactical, operational between the haematology services that are being run. So I guess really it's just that plea again to make sure we've got things happening at the right level, otherwise we end up duplicating. But I mean, there are some thinking about the pipeline for registered nurses, midwives, and some of the AHPs within our ICS. There's many things we could be doing strategically and different around that, helping the anchor institutions, and it feels that I'm not sure from this report whether we've quite got the focus right. Now, it may well be that it's just the way that the report's written and it is more strategically focused, but it was just a plea around that, making sure we've got things at the right place.
Thank you, Jane. Katie, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would agree with you, Jane. I think we've had 2 people forums so far, and we're working through which are the right issues to bring. And we did feel we ended up a little bit operational in that meeting, and we're doing a review with partners who come along to that meeting about what should be there, because we do want that to be the strategic forum. The next time that we meet, we're going to look at it a bit more like a think tank, bringing in a few different ideas, particularly about our HCA and healthcare support worker workforce. So we will be focusing more on that issue and how we bring people into the system and where they move to, and some of the attraction and retention issues that we face with that critical part of our workforce that we all have across all parts of the system. So we hear what you're saying, and we're working on making that more strategic. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Katie, and I think that's helpful. I know it was something that Katie and I think Mark Yates, who's involved in that, had already sort of shared. So I think it's important to note that, because obviously with all of these, it's you're right, Jane. It's important that we add that. You know, it's what are the things that we can influence at system level versus obviously organisation versus place as well. So it's being clear about that, and certainly the area of focus that Katie highlighted, I think, is a helpful one. So I take it from certainly I know there were some supportive comments about the MenCat Treat Me Well pledge. I take it that the board is happy to support that. I do want to highlight it's not just a pledge that we will I mean, Simon and I could have signed it, to be frank, just on our own, but I think it was important to bring it to the board, because actually the commitments in it are quite explicit, and it's important that we sort of collectively own them. So it includes sort of things like, you know, making sure we're making reasonable adjustments for access, thinking about mandatory training as well. The Oliver McGowan training is mentioned in there. So, you know, if we're signing it collectively, and it obviously refers to all partners as well, actually making sure that we're genuinely signed up to that and we're taking it forward together, I think will be important. So is everyone comfortable that we make that commitment? And clearly we will need to just think about how we take forward the actions that will be part of that. Is that okay? Good. I'm seeing nods, so I'll take that as yes, and we will take that forward and obviously highlight any actions we need to take as a result. Thank you, Simon. I think it was a really full report and lots of really helpful updates in that. We are now moving forward to the next item, which is item number 9, which is the integrated care strategy. David Mahaffey, do you want to come in and highlight anything from the report?
Yeah, thanks. Morning, everybody. So just a quick update on the integrated care strategy, the joint forward plan, and a few headlines from the point prevalence audit that we undertook. So just quickly run through where we are with the strategy at the moment. The integrated care partnership met on the 7th of October, which was obviously since the last board meeting, and started and initiated the work to develop this strategy. The timeline for producing the strategy is outlined on page 2 and page 3 of the report, and we're currently in that process at the moment, identifying the timeline of agreeing the overarching vision with the 2 health and wellbeing boards. We had a conversation with the Worcestershire Health and Wellbeing Board last week and agreed the kind of headline vision. There's a conversation with the Herefordshire Health and Wellbeing Board next week. So taking those 2 feedbacks plus the ICB's discussions that we had at the development session together, hopefully we will have a kind of a headline vision, mission statement, set of kind of pledges for partners working together that can sit at the very front of the strategy, and then that leads into the kind of the detail that we'll go on to work through. So at the moment there's lots of kind of engagement discussions with partners, including meetings of, you know, with health overview scrutiny committees, various other district council meetings, Worcestershire Leaders Forum, etc., as well as individual meetings with individual organisations. So I know Ali's been out speaking to WMAS, for example, and various other groups, voluntary sector groups, housing groups, etc. So there's a lot of kind of engagement to bring all of that together. We are aiming to have the kind of core content for the first interim, and I emphasise again, interim draft strategy for December. It's going to be an early draft. It's headlines, We'll then discuss that at the Integrated Care Partnership on the 14th of December, and be seeking a kind of an approval to publish the first iteration of it. It will be the first iteration because we'll then spend time from January to March kind of refining it, doing more widespread engagement, a little bit of, I wouldn't call it consultation as such, but public engagement, exercise, etc., which is an important part of developing it. And alongside that, as NHS partners, the ICB and the 3 NHS trusts have to produce a joint forward plan, as it's called, so a 5-year joint forward plan, which is in essence the NHS's response and contribution to the delivery of the integrated care strategy. It's important to remember the integrated care strategy is the product of the joint work of the 2 upper tier local authorities, the ICB, and all the wider partners. The joint forward plan is very much the NHS contribution to the delivery of that, and I think that's a clear distinction. We are expecting some further guidance on JFPs after the budget statement tomorrow. That will obviously be fairly fundamental in terms of how that sets out ambition for improvement and the kind of metrics we'll need to work towards. But I think it's pretty obvious and highly likely that the JFP will need to address the kind of issues that we've put on page 4 of that report. You know, the operational challenges we face here and now will need to be featured in that JFP, as well as the NHS contribution to the rest of the long-term development. So the second part of the report was on the point prevalence audit, which Simon prefaced just now. This is not just an exercise in its own right, but it kind of feeds a number of things that we wanted to do. So it's part of the best use of resources programme, because we recognise that making optimal use of our resources is clearly part of that programme and making sure we spend our money wisely. But it's also a very fundamental part of the baselining for the strategy. If we're not treating people or providing care, whether that's health or social care, in the optimal setting for their needs at that point in time, then that's a challenge that collectively we need to come together to address. So it's about addressing that. So we did the audit on the 21st of September, and the key question was, are we treating people in their optimal care setting? And if not, why not? The results, headline results, show a remarkable degree of similarity. So the answer to the question in Y Valley was 72.2% yes in the right setting, and in Worcester Acute it was 70% in the right setting. But there were some stark differences to the reasons why people weren't in the right setting. And we're at the moment, as a strategic steering group, exploring some of those reasons, and then include things like how assessment processes work, the balance of capacity, the social care challenges, for example, which are coming out as apparently significantly greater in Herefordshire, which is probably no surprise to us. We know that, but this point prevalence audit's put some numbers to it. So as I say, working through the finer details with the strategic steering group, which, just to reassure people, includes all partners. It's Christine Blanchard, Rob Cunningham, Mike Fitton, Hilary Hall and Jane, who's on the call today. It's the group that's overseeing that. And I would anticipate that we would be in a position to bring a more detailed action plan with some of the things that we're intending to do differently as a result of this to the January meeting of the board. So I'll pause there and take any questions.
Thank you, David. That's really helpful to have that sort of timeline and noted as well. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a comment about the 5-year joint forward plan. I'm a little bit concerned that there isn't any provider general practice involvement in this, because one of the key targets is improving access to primary care services, and that in itself is probably a national driver, although we are performing already at the top of national league tables in those. So we may want to nuance this to be looking more at some of the fuller stocktake principles about how we improve urgent care. And I think the provider voice in that is very important. And I think it would be very useful to include provider general practice in those discussions and setting the strategy.
Yes, absolutely agree, Nigel. The draft guidance was a little bit contradictory in some respects around this. So it talks about the kind of statutory requirement of the ICB and the trusts, and then a little bit later on it describes the local flexibility to bring in wider partners as needed and as required, including social care, primary care providers and other organisations. So rest assured that the discussions we have around this planning cycle do include Nisha, for example, from Herefordshire, Holly Hastings from the Worcestershire side. So general practice, the PCNs are very much part of those strategy discussions that underpin that. And apologies, I didn't make that clear in the way I described it at the beginning.
Thank you, Nigel, and thank you, David, for the response. Sarah?
Thanks, David. I don't want to get into any of the weeds of the detail of the point prevalence because that's not for here, but it's really just to seek assurance really that that you're confident about the validity of the process. Just looking at it, some of the numbers don't, or the way that it's presented, some of it is quite difficult to understand, or some of the numbers don't seem to sort of quite tally. So it's really just that the strategic steering group, you've confidence that they're going to scrutinise this. It's not going to say just what we hope it would say. And I guess the methodology as well about what we've included in the point prevalence. So of note, primary care appointments aren't taken into account. It's quite an acute focused piece of work. So just that broad brush really, because you said it was going to be brought back at some point with more detail. Thanks.
Yeah, so just to clarify, it's not just acute focus. We did every bedded care setting, whether that was acute, pathway 2, pathway 3, pathway 1, you know, the person in their own bed, all the community hospitals. We also include mental health facilities, so it certainly wasn't just an acute setting. I'm fairly confident on the robustness of the methodology because we had a 3-month run-in to the exercise before we launched it. So the strategic steering group was set up kind of 3 months before we did the work, and we did spend a lot of time. We pilot tested it, getting the process right, and it actually went off remarkably smoothly. You're right, question about the differences in the data, and that's why I urge caution to everybody I speak to about this, about not taking one number in isolation from it and looking across the whole picture. And that's what we're doing through the strategic steering group. So I'm comfortable that we have the right process, but we have to be very careful about how we interpret the data and then use that to translate into specific actions. And I don't know, I mean, Jane's a member of the strategic steering group. I don't know whether you want to add anything to that. Jane.
I just added in the chat. Yeah, I'm happy the numbers are broadly right. They don't need to be, you know, to 0.01%, but they're broadly right, and I think they're telling us a story which I think we recognise. So I think it does give us a baseline to do some of the right things and make a difference to some of those.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, David. I mean, just to remind colleagues, actually this piece of work was commissioned some time ago, prior to the ICB being established, actually. So it's had a decent run up, and as David says, in terms of planning, so really important. I think it will be helpful, David, if we're reporting back to the next meeting, just to you know, be really clear what our conclusions are, and perhaps just remind colleagues what that methodology was, so that that's available, so that people understand that. Would that be okay, David? And just as background information, just in terms of assurance. Will?
Yeah, just a quick point rather than a question. Just because it's interesting, I met yesterday with members of the Herefordshire and Worcestershire Research Collaborative, which is a nascent sort of collaborative forming around developing research across Herefordshire and Worcestershire, and they brought up with me the ICS strategy and really want to emphasise that they see Hereford and Worcestershire developing to a real engine of change in terms of research and innovation, especially with the links to the university. And were asking that was put down in the strategy, and there was a good focus as an ICS on how we're going to develop that. So I said I'd bring it along.
Thank you, Will. So we can reflect that, I think, in the development, David. I'm assuming.
Yeah, Ali's already initiated a conversation with somebody to pick up that level of detail. Well, so I am aware that that's in the offing.
Great. Thank you, Will, for bringing that to the attention of the board. So I think, David, at this stage, you just wanted us to note progress with the development of the strategy and where we are in terms of the, it's a new language, isn't it? The JFP, new 3-letter abbreviation for us to all get familiar with, the Joint Forward Plan. But I think you've highlighted the time pressures that are likely to be there. So with some of these things, I guess, you know, as you've already said, I think in the paper, even with the integrated care strategy, there's a requirement to publish it by the end of December, I believe. But we have to recognise that obviously in the timescales these are sort of initial documents perhaps that we're developing, and we will need to sort of keep them under review. So thank you very much. We move on then, and just also noting, of course, that we will bring the further report back on the point prevalence audit back to the next meeting. Okay, moving on then to our system performance focus and risk section. So our first item within this is item number 10, which is the deep dive on children and young people. And just to remind people that actually, to some degree, I know this would have been before the establishment of the ICB, but we did have an integrated care system forum where children and young people was considered, and we thought it was important to bring it to the ICB to give us a sort of refresh of where we are. So, Mary, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Chair, and thank you all. So children and young peoples has become quite a national priority within the NHS and indeed the whole system. I think we've probably heard more from our regional national colleagues on children and young people in the last 12 months than I think I have done in my whole career. I think that's really helpful because the focus on the health and well-being of our children is really important for future health. So we've done a lot of work of analysing our children and young people. 19% of our population are classified as such, and nationally they have introduced this National Children and People's Transformation Programme, and it's really been established with very strong governance from Secretary of State down to oversee the delivery of the children and young people's commitments in the long-term plan that was published some ago, with very clearly defined regional and ICS expectations that we are monitored on a very regular basis. It was all paused during the pandemic, and there's been definitely a resurgence of the work in recent times. And really the requirements, I've been told many times, is to bring this to the ICB board to make sure people are aware and supportive of the actions that we're taking. It's really designed to make sure children have equitable access to all the high quality care, health and care services they need, and it's tailored to their individual needs as well. We have put in place an ICS Children's Board. It's multi-partners. It's representative of the councils, the health partners, primary care partners, children, young people's advocates. It's really become quite a strong and thriving board, to be honest. It took a while to get there, but we are there now. And we really are focused on the 6 national priorities. But as an ICS, we have chosen to add 2 local ICS priorities. That is SEND and mental health and wellbeing for children as well, because we saw those as priorities. And we did feel the national priorities were a bit too health focused. From an ICS, we wanted a more integrated focus. So I'm not going to take you through all of the areas on the deep dive, because I'm going to pick out some pertinent ones that really are sort of flashing as a cause for concern. So obesity. So the government's obesity plan is to halve childhood obesity and reduce the gap from those in the least deprived areas by 2030. And across our ICS, and this was quite a shock to me when I saw, the figures on this, we have consistently higher rates of overweight and obese children than England's average, but by some quite startling amounts, really. And you can see the detail there. There's obviously a very clear link between childhood obesity and social deprivation, and you can see that particularly in Worcestershire, the Worcestershire deprived areas. And the concern that's coming down through the national communications is because of the current financial position of the country and the current deprivation that could get worse, this could be enhanced even further. So we have put in place an ICS working group, and they've now finished and completed a scoping exercise to look at existing, what we currently provide in advice support for children with obesity. And we've learned from other analysis of other local authorities who do have downward trends in childhood obesity rates. There is a lot of learning out there, so we have spent some time doing that. And the 8 areas outlined in the bullet points are what others have done and have been successful in reducing their obesity rates. You know, we have quite some heated discussions about some of these and what impact they have. It seems to have worked elsewhere as a combination of all those 8 areas, not as individual actions. We've also, on top of that, secured some funding for a 1-year pilot of a family coaching service. It's a hybrid social prescribing and health coaching role, working with approximately 100 families, focusing on their areas of greatest deprivation, and focusing on children with obviously overweight or obesity, but the family priorities and the family as a unit as well, and it's not just weight management support, it's lifestyle support as well. Both of our place-based areas, so Hereford and Worcestershire, are taking a slightly different approach to that, and that's fine. It's just we will monitor and the impact of those and see what impact that has in conjunction with those eight areas of improvement. We've included Action for Children in Worcestershire in those discussions as well, to make sure they're particularly involved because they have quite a voice in this, and to understand how we feel we best use this impact of this extra resource we've got. A lot of discussions in the working group about every contact with every healthcare professional, social care professional, everybody counts in helping to improve things, but we're not convinced we've given all our practitioners all the tools, etc., that they need to help. So the focus of the working group will be on that as well, and we will monitor that closely. So probably quite closely, in a way, linked to this is the infant mortality. See, I've given you the rates per 1,000 births, which again, we were quite shocked when we first, I think I mentioned at the last ICS exec, we were quite shocked when we saw this. And it's obviously an indicator of general health of the intervention. It's a very complex situation. It's heavily linked into Kath's work and others' work on the LMNS work, you know, and the maternity services work. We have taken a step forward. So the working group has developed a framework for the infant strategy, and a comprehensive data analysis is almost complete. I've seen a version of it recently, just needs a little bit more work. And in January, we're planning a stakeholder event to share all the data analysis, the strategy, consult on the action plan, to make sure we have all partners inputting into those action plan, engaged, and we're all moving in the same direction. I mean, the 5 years, it's probably going to be a 5-year strategy, because obviously we are engaging schools as well as much as we can in this, and some interesting partners on this. But obviously a lot of the childhood time is in our schools, and we need to make sure the same approach and they have the same tools as the rest of the services that we have in our system. So data behind that one is very interesting. It's very it can be manipulated in very many ways. So what I want to do is get as many stakeholders as possible to understand the data and make sure that we want to benchmark it with other areas to make sure we've got it right as well. So that's infant mortality. I'll move on and go on to acute, urgent and emergency care, because it does cover some of the asthma, epilepsy, diabetes that you'll see. Well, I'm happy to take any questions on that. So we know that, you know, a fairly large percentage of attendances to ED are children, and about 30 to 50% of those attendances could be managed. The research.
Mary,
sorry.
Mary, sorry to interrupt you. Is it just me, or is Mary's volume a little bit shaky?
Is it?
Okay. So Mary, I just thought maybe, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I just thought perhaps you might need to move your seat forward or something. But we did get. I think we got most of that very clearly. But
okay.
Didn't want to lose anything
as
important.
possible. Let me move it down to my normal computer and see if that helps. Okay, is that any better?
Yes, sounds better. Thanks, Mary.
Right, thank you. Okay, so there's 3 areas the ICS Children and People's Urgent Emergency Care Subgroup are focusing on. So it's reducing, putting in pathways to reduce the type 1 attendances in our departments from trauma and the accidents that children inevitably have that could be managed in minor injury units or self-care in many cases, and giving practitioners and families the tools to do that. We have in place, this was launched by Louise Bramble, our clinical lead for children. She launched it in Worcestershire. She's about to launch it in Herefordshire to the general population. It's called a Handy app. It's an app for parents on how to manage childhood illnesses. It's had some real benefits in part of our ICS. We want to roll it out, and it gives some families a reassurance they're doing the right thing. And then more communications on training and healthcare. Where we are, going back to the 111 conversation, there is a big drive from 111 into our ED department for children specifically. So we are working with the regional team on how we can influence and prevent unnecessary attendance to our ED. The last 2 areas I'll go through as speedily as I can. So SEND, the special educational needs and disability. So there's 2 separate work streams in both, one in Hereford and one in Worcestershire. The one in Worcestershire is a long history of a difficult inspection, I think in 2018, where a lot of learning and coming together as a place-based system to improve SEND happened. There was a re-inspection in October, a lot of improvement. I think we went from 12 to 4 areas of concern. The 4 areas of concern that still remain are outlined in the paper. And there is a accelerated progress plan jointly led by Worcestershire Children's First and the ICB to improve those last 4 areas. And we're getting good feedback from the region at the moment on those to see the improvement. In Herefordshire, a recent local government peer review, it's not an inspection, but it's a review, a critical friend review, has shown some considerable areas of requiring improvement. We need to come together from ICB and Herefordshire children's leads to develop a strategic board, a SEND strategic board and a strategic partnership, and have a clear strategy and mandate and clear plan for improvement. I think a lot of learning can be brought from Worcestershire into Herefordshire. This does take time. It's not something done very quickly. There's been some immediate actions that we've put in place. So we've aligned a designated clinical officer to Herefordshire, but we've now, I believe we've got the first board in later this month, SEND strategic board. We now need to take that forward as quickly as possible to see improvements before the inspection next year. We've also formed a partnership with Action for Children across the area to gather the views of children and young people and their families in the experience of their services that will help to influence all of this as well. So we're hearing the children's voice in that area. So overall, we've got some significant challenges in children's that I don't think we've ever seen before in particularly health services. Challenges on page 7. There's been a doubling in the amount of children and young people with complex additional needs requiring support over the last 5 years. COVID seems to have had a major impact, particularly on referrals, early referrals for children with query autism, query ADHD. Our clinical colleagues out there have got much larger caseloads of children requiring lifelong support. And the request for education, health and care plans new assessment is rising at quite an alarming rate. So it's really impacting our services, our children's services. We've recently had to make the decision that we will now be classing them as vulnerable services. That's in both places, in both Herefordshire and Worcestershire. Talking to other regional colleagues, they're having exactly the same issues. It's really the increased demand, but the fragility of the workforce, a bit like primary care, the specialist children's workforce, the age profile, we're losing a lot of people to retirement and we haven't got the numbers coming through to meet the demand. So we put some mitigations in place. We want to rapidly have a more effective and sustainable approach to these changes, but at the moment we are looking at how we can clinically prioritise need, and we are putting recovery plans for each area in place. We're starting to really understand the demand and capacity measures of each of the services, and it is quite concerning in some areas. We're just waiting for the outcome of an ICS external review of paediatric therapies, maybe to look at a potential new service model and greater integration across our ICS. It's something we are exploring to see how much more efficiency we can put in place. And we're also we're trying to communicate with our most vulnerable children and their families about the concerns at the moment, so they understand why in some areas they're waiting longer than we would want to. This has obviously had an impact in both of our councils, both Herefordshire and Worcestershire, in the early help so EHCP process, and we recognise that we're trying to do something to increase that as much. But the statistics we're hearing about the increase in demand, particularly post-COVID, never anticipated. We're trying to understand the reasons why. So children's and young people's is a very complex area, multifaceted. There's lots of work. We've been asked to focus regionally, nationally on these 6 plus our 2 local areas, and that gives you an overview of where we are. But happy to take any questions, Christian.
Thank you, Mary. There is such a myriad of services, isn't there? And I think that makes it quite a complex overview. So we've had a fairly comprehensive view of that in the report. But certainly there are some questions and comments that people would like to make. So I'll bring people in order. So first of all, Vicky, please.
Sorry, I think you're on mute, Vicky.
We still can't hear you, Vicky. It keeps going back on mute. Shall I come back to you, David?
Yes, thank you very much. Mary, it's 2 questions. One is a simple data question. Under asthma, where you've got some numbers there, are they per 1,000 of population? I'm not sure what those numbers for Herefordshire and Worcestershire and England are representing.
Yes, they come out nationally as per 1,000 per head of population for the children's population, yeah. Thank you.
And the second question was on Appendix A. When we talk about transition, we've got by 2028, no child, young person or adolescent will be able to become lost in the gaps. I just wanted to question that date really of 2028. I know we should be looking further ahead and looking at preventive measures and thinking longer term, but 2028 seems a long way away for us to not be losing young people in those gaps.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I think, and we did talk to the region about that target overall because it's such a difficult target to measure in the first place. But what we've asked each of the work streams to do is to consider best practice transition. I'll use diabetes as an example. It's been notoriously difficult between childhood diabetic services and adult diabetic services to get a smooth transition, and the expectation of the child and the family is often, you know, that the services will be exactly the same. So each work stream is looking at this, but it's interesting, that's the one that they haven't come down with individual measures from nationally, how we're going to measure that. But it's a good point well made. But what we've done is we've asked each area to look at best practice transition in there.
Thank you, David. Vicky, do you want to come in? Or have I can't. Oh, I can't.
Yeah, we've finally sorted my technical problems, so apologies for that. Just really helpful report, Mary. But I guess what I wanted to understand was the governance going forward in terms of the strategy, because some real challenges, as you've outlined, particularly the deprivation, the health outcomes, and the resources issue. So how will the Children's Board link in with the governance into the ICB, and thinking particularly QRD, in terms of understanding some of those challenges going forward?
Okay, thank you. So anything that comes up with quality resources or delivery issues will go to QRD. But if we need to make a big decision or a strategic decision about something we want to commission or put forward, that will go to the Strategic Commissioning Committee. Sarah chairs. So that's the way all of the programme boards are designed to work. I'm looking for Hannah for reassurance here. That's the way all the programme boards are designed to work in future. So they aren't decision-making forums, ICS Children's Board or any of them. They will make the recommendations as partners to SCC, but then highlight to the QRD where we need some more sustainable services. And you know, some of our children's therapy services are extremely fragile at the moment and struggling to recruit and may need more resource. And you know, we may be coming in the not too distant future to QRD to have that discussion.
Really helpful, thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Vicky. Jane.
Thanks. I'll put something in the chat about some data, Mary. But in terms of my broader points, I'm sort of sat here shocked. Actually, I haven't seen this data until I went through the papers yesterday, and I think it's really shocking. And I guess there's two areas I would pick out for that. One is around obesity. And particularly for Herefordshire, you know, what is going on? At reception, there's 8% who are obese by the time they're in year 6. It's 18%. I mean, there's got to be opportunities for us through schools to do something different in Herefordshire to make a difference. So I think that's an opportunity. But the area I'm really shocked about is around mortality. Now, we did work on infant mortality in terms of the hospital-based maternity services, and actually had seen this going in the right direction. And so this is 2020, because it was some very old data, and that now isn't that old, and so I'm surprised it hasn't improved. But also I had and it may well be the same source of data. I had a press inquiry yesterday about the health index, the ONS health index data, which may well be where this comes from, on the infant mortality index, and the bottom 10 in the country in the West Midlands, and 3 of them are in our ICB. So it's Bromsgrove, it's Malvern, and it's Herefordshire. So on the basis that we can't do everything all at once, I think we absolutely have to have a focus on infant mortality. We have to understand what's going on and what the drivers are, and take this as one of our priorities, that we just don't let go of it until it's better. If we don't serve, obviously we have pockets of deprivation, but we don't serve a highly deprived population. So for our infant mortality outcomes to be this bad, I just think it's shocking, and so I want this really at the top of our agenda.
Thank you, Jane, and I'll bring Mary back in. But I think when Mary first presented that data, we were shocked, actually. But I think we wanted to validate it, Mary, and make sure that we were, we had the most up-to-date position. I think also, if I remember a conversation with David Mahaffey about the integrated care strategy, we were actually thinking about, this area being a focus as part of that, because clearly, for all the reasons you said. So perhaps, David, do you want to comment on that? And I'll just bring Mary in as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If we apply the findings of the JSNA, which the integrated care strategy has to do, this absolutely stands out, and it was discussed at the Worcestershire Health and Wellbeing Board yesterday as well. So I can't imagine a scenario where this won't be one of the top priorities in the joint, in the plan, this strategy that we need to produce, and the subsequent joint forward plan that comes on the back of it.
Great, thank you, Mary.
Yeah, I mean, Jane, I was really, really shocked, and I keep sending them back to double check, triple check that this is right. I think in the workshop that we have in January, which I think we need our most senior people there, our clinicians there, some of our public there. I think we need to look under the lid of some of this data, because the bits I've seen, I'm a bit confused about, to be honest. I think we really need to understand what's driving it, and you can't immediately see it from the data at all. So I think January will be quite seminal. Then we can look at going to how we recover the position.
Thanks, Mary. Paul Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Really, mine's more a general point about children and young people generally. If you look at the report overall, what it shows is a myriad of problems at all age groups within that young cohort. I think there's a danger that we end up focusing, absolutely right, on infant mortality, etc., and treatment and asthma and various other things. But a lot of what we're finding really is in our early health work that it's the predeterminants. Housing is a huge issue for young people. And when they're born into poor housing conditions, and unfortunately we've seen it on the news, haven't we, yesterday, of the coroner finding the young lad that died from mould. I think what we're failing to do at the moment is draw together what are the key issues that affect young people. So not just the ones that need our intervention, our treatment, but what are those factors that are dragging down the health opportunities for young people? You talked about obesity, you know, we talk about exercise, we talk about housing, we talk about you know, mental health, particularly amongst young people. And we're in a bit of a vicious circle really at the moment, I think, and we need to give some thought about the multi-agency aspect of the ICB, about how do we bring those strands together to, you know, leisure and diversionary activity and exercise sits with districts, child safety, if you like, sits with the county, and then health sits with the NHS. This is an absolutely great area that we could have some intervention across system to make a real difference, not only to those children that are in the cohort we need to treat at the moment, but to prevent people coming into it in a few years' time. So I just wouldn't want to lose the focus on having some interventions in that strategy that are preventative rather than just treatment, is the comment I would make.
Thank you, Paul. I think we'd all support that. I mean, we do need to remind ourselves that the ICB's, one of the ICB's duties is actually around those sort of socioeconomic factors and wider determinants, and this is perhaps an area of opportunity in that respect. And I'm sure David and the integrated care strategy and us in this sort of wider piece of in the children, young people board need to be cognizant of that and pick up that as a piece of work. Mary, did you want to make any particular comment about that before I bring Paul Walker?
No, I just think it's a really good reminder, Paul, and I think through in this workshop in January and through the ICB and Children's Board, you know, I will, as chair, I will make sure we get that thread in and come and talk to people about how we do that in practice, because that's the difficult bit, isn't it? How we make it happen.
And it's a timely reminder about that very sad story that I think we probably all saw on the news yesterday regarding the housing conditions that caused the death of a young boy. Paul Walker. Paul, you're on mute.
Apologies for that. Yes, thank you to Paul for raising that. Happy to support the workshop in January. Keen to play a part in that. I just wanted to kind of draw back on the recent inspection of children's services in Herefordshire and the inadequate across the board rating from the inspectors with regards to children's services. And there was the couple of standout features for that, with particular reference to the work of the ICS. One was around access to health services for young people, but secondly, and it perhaps goes to the last item, was relationship with partner agencies being underdeveloped, and that's notwithstanding a huge amount of effort and commitment that goes in from many people that were on this meeting today, and talks about the broader relationship across our partnership. But I think that what we've just talked about in terms of our early help, particularly around young people, infant mortality and mental health, are areas to kind of practice what we preach in that respect even more. So yes, keen to play a part there. Just in terms of the reality of the situation where we are, the Children's Commissioner has been appointed, and she will be reporting to the Secretary of State around about the 12th of December on whether Herefordshire Children's Services have got the capacity and capability to deliver the improvements that are required. Either yes, it has, or yes, but they may need some help, or no, and we need to find alternative delivery arrangements. So we're in the middle of that piece of work with the Commission, who's talking to partners and staff and members across the organisation. But notwithstanding that, we still have an improvement plan which is being brought together, which addresses the recommendations from the inspection. And what I would like to do, Chair, as I said earlier, is kind of bring both the report and the improvement plan back to the board in January. We'll know then what the arrangements are going to be for the future provision of children's services across Herefordshire. So we can build that into that report and engage with partners on across the ICB in terms of how we all play our part and take that forward.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think as we've committed, I'm sure we can find a way of accommodating that into the next meeting. And I think, you know, everything we're saying, you know, we talk so much about prevention, but I know it's a bit of a cliche to say, but children and young people are sort of, you know, early intervention and support for children and young people is the sort of ultimate prevention, isn't it? I mean, you know, in that sense, it's such a priority, and there's always a danger that with, you know, the focus on sort of adult social care and adult health services, that we miss this very complex area, and particularly because there's so many services, and trying to make sure they actually work in an integrated and cohesive way is a real opportunity for us to make a difference working together. So we will absolutely pick that up. Sarah.
Thank you. It picks up a little bit on what both Pauls have said. So thank you for the comments about the wider determinants, and I think that's picked up through the health and wellbeing boards, and is something that, if we want to make a fundamental difference and shift the dial on some of these things, this is our opportunity in an integrated care system to look at the health and the NHS angle, but also what it really means to address housing, education, local prosperity, and those things that we know play a huge part in people's well-being, especially that of children from kind of preconception through. So I would echo the comments that you made there, and then it was to pick up a little bit just on I suppose a governance quick question. On the front of the paper it says that this is for assurance. At the end it says we're to note it. I guess given some of the very serious issues raised regarding some of the waiting times for physical therapies, that what Paul was alluding to there regarding awaiting the Children's Commissioner coming through, I just wonder whether this is for us to note or if it's for us as a board to be assured on. I'm not quite clear the breadth of what I'm being asked to be the plans to be assured on, and so I just sort of raise a caution there that I'm not happy to say that I'm fully assured on all these plans. I don't think I've got them in enough detail. Sorry, Hannah, I can see you.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Sarah. Hannah?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Just to come in on that, so it's yeah, you're right, and I think this is exactly what we are trying to resolve at the moment, aren't we? We do need to make sure that when we provide reports for assurance, we actually state the level of assurance. I completely understand it's very difficult just to present a paper to the board that clearly doesn't offer full assurance and ask the board members to be assured. So we are in the process of developing a more sophisticated approach to assurance, where we will be requesting a specific for the board to note a specific level of assurance. So going forward, that will be, you know, there will be nuanced and a more detailed. So yeah, noted. You're really good point.
And if I may, I'm so sorry, Krishni. The original reason I put my hand up was just, Mary, I think there's new data published which actually makes the national position on childhood obesity far worse than our local position on obesity, and it was raised yesterday at the Health and Wellbeing Board that actually we are not such an outlier. In fact, we may be slightly below the national rates of obesity for children. So I just, it'd be interesting, just as we develop the strategy, we develop that, but in no way does that mean that the focus on obesity, the move towards prevention, the targeted work, that absolutely has to happen. And if we have fallen below, we want to stay below and get even better. So it's not to move away from that, but just in the context of the sort of the public narrative. Sadly, because others are getting worse, I think it means that we locally look better. But I bow to the public health colleagues to pick through the data. But thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so I mean, I think just because it's the report safer assurance, that doesn't mean the board needs to take full assurance from the report. I think it's for the board to conclude that you know, what assurance it wishes to take and what it would like to see in order to gain full assurance. And I think in this instance, Sarah, you're right to say, you know, clearly at this stage, this is an update for us to understand where things are. Note that some things are in hand, but beyond that, so, you know, I think it's fair to say, whilst, you know, clearly there's a lot of work going on to try and address this, and I think we're getting under some of the issues we need to address, there's clearly a lot more to be done. And I suspect full assurance on this is some way off. But what it has done is, I think, perhaps focused our attention on a really key important priority for all of us to move forward. And in that sense, for me, that's important because we've all recognised by seeing the data that actually this could be a really significant priority for us, and one in which we can all make a difference and work together on. And that feels really important to me in its own right, and I think is of value. So Mary, thank you very much for the report. I think we kind of know all the actions that are underway and the sort of developing picture around this. Clearly, we recognise that we're not fully assured. But I do think this points to the opportunity also for the integrated care strategy. So there's the immediate work that you're already doing, but it's how that features in the integrated care strategy, but also bringing back, as we've already said, the Herefordshire action plan and making sure we keep a focus on this. I think Vicky and Sarah have also commented about the governance and making sure that we maintain a focus on this so it flows through our other committees as well. Mary, any final comment before we move on?
No, thank you. I think this is a long-term strategy, part of the long-term strategy, and, you know, full assurance is going to, I agree, is going to be some way off. I think focusing on the work streams and working together as an integrated system is the best opportunity.
Great, thank you, Mary. I suggest, I know a couple of colleagues might need to step out of the meeting, and I'm conscious that we've now been looking at our papers for a little while, so I'm going to suggest that we take a short break, just to a comfort break. And can I suggest that we get back together at 11:15, at which point we will pick up the cancer paper, which is next on our agenda. Is that okay? I suggest colleagues turn off their volume and their camera whilst they're away from their desk.
Matthew, you know your camera's still on, don't you?
Thanks, Anita.
Welcome back, everybody. Hannah, I think you just wanted to make a process comment, didn't you? I'll just bring you in.
Yes, thank you, Krishna. Yeah, if people could just please not use the chat function for any comments related to the meeting, the papers or the discussions, because the chat function isn't visible on live stream. So we need to make sure any members of the public have sight of the full discussion that we're having today. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Okay, I shall now like to invite Mary again. Mary, you're going to have another item to cover off, in fact, a couple of items. So we need a bit of your time here on this bit of the agenda. So we have item 11, which is the deep dive on cancer services. And just a little bit of a little bit up front, I wanted to say was be useful, I think, just to, I'm aware that, and it's mentioned in the committee report, that this was also discussed at the Quality Resources and Delivery Committee, so it'd be useful for colleagues who were involved in that to comment on sort of the assurances that were obtained from that. Over to Mary.
I think she may have technical difficulties, Krishna. I think she's just gone into David's office to, yes, there she is.
Okay, Mary has just appeared as David Mahaffey, but we all know that that's Mary, so welcome.
Apologies, people, we're trying to make it better and I think we've made it worse. Okay, thanks. You happy for me to start on the deep dive of cancer services? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, please do.
Thank you, colleagues. So I think that we've highlighted through the Quality Resources Delivery Committee and indeed before through boards that, you know, one of our biggest challenges in recovery of services post-COVID is the cancer services. So cancer services is, you know, in our clinical prioritisation framework that we've signed off, second to urgent and emergency care is our top priority, where we, you know, put as much effort and resource in as we can to recover, because obviously the significance of getting cancer services right for our population. So you can see on page 2, our performance section, our performance as an ICS against the 4 critical cancer standards across and what those mean. So, you know, the urgency that you need to get someone with a suspected cancer into a hospital to get investigations and a clinical opinion, through to the treatment and the diagnosis of the treatment of that patient and how we're performing. So you can see nationally there is concern that we're not meeting the standards post-COVID, but locally, obviously in our ICS, we've got some significant challenges in meeting those standards as well. So we are one of our areas in our ICS. So Worcestershire is classed as tier 1. That is the highest tier of concern, and we meet with the regional leads and some of the national leads on a weekly basis for Worcestershire, looking at the demand, the capacity, the actions that we're taking to try and resolve the issue. I mean, one of the biggest there's 2 biggest drivers in this is the increase in demand. The demand on some of the pathways particularly is quite significant and has grown. That's patients probably who didn't come forward during COVID, but also more aware with recent national campaigns about cancer, you know, in high profile individuals. They're coming forward in bigger numbers. There's been a change in primary care for, you know, more encouragement for earlier diagnosis as well, which is obviously driving demand. But we have capacity issues in workforce, diagnostics, and sometimes in theatre capacity that we need to meet the demands of these areas. So we are working very hard on analysing each best practice pathway for cancer across the ICS, Herefordshire as well, but also main focus in Worcestershire. How are we performing in clinical terms against each of the best practice care pathways? And we're making some rapid changes to some of those care pathways in line with best practice, and we have seen a little bit of improvement in some areas. The recovery plans are focused in Worcestershire on 3 main tumour pathways. That is skin, urology and colorectal, and indeed across the region, talking to our colleagues, those are the 3 pathways where most people are having issues. So we are redesigning the pathways. We're putting in extra support in where we can in the form of independent sector capacity, extra workforce. Regional clinical leads are coming in to support us as well, to improve those pathways at pace.
We haven't seen the impact of that yet. You can see from the chart on the top of page 3, we have 62-day breach is one of the biggest causes for concern, and the numbers we have are quite significant, and they are largely in those three care pathways. So with skin, just to give you a bit more assurance. So for skin pathway, we have got an independent provider in Hereford, providing some mutual aid to Worcestershire, and we are the primary care services in Worcestershire are planning a more primary care focused service and using teledermatology, which will help to speed up processes. We're not likely to see any improvement until January at the earliest, and that's going to be with a lot of daily monitoring of this for skin. For urology and for colorectal, we're not envisaging until the end of the financial year we're going to see some impact on those services because of the significance of the change that we need to make and the extra resource we need to put in place. We are looking at the longer term as well. We're looking at the sustainability of our services, and Katie, through the People Board, is looking at a rapid assessment of the workforce in our 4 main tumour pathways and what we could potentially do to increase the workforce, how we could use the workforce differently, and with a focus on improving, if we can improve that one target longer term, the 28-day faster standard target, that gives our population a really good chance of accessing services quickly, being diagnosed quickly, and getting into treatment pathways within an appropriate time. Obviously, this is diagnostics is a big area of concern in this. So we're fortunate that we've already got a diagnostic centre in Kidderminster. It's growing, its capacity is growing. Workforce is a challenge, but it gives us more capacity. And we are planning a second diagnostic centre in Herefordshire, hopefully in 2024, if everything goes in the right direction. For that one, will give us more capacity. Obviously, the quality issues around this, integrating our profile, are quite of a concern. And the provider cancer boards are looking at harm reviews of those patients waiting over 104 days and taking the learning in and quicker actions to address the needs of those individuals going forward. Early diagnosis and screening, we have actually, and the national screening programs have recovered post-pandemic, so they're now up and running. And of course, those positive patients, the screening programs are coming into the cancer pathways as well. And they are focusing on improving uptake and equality. So those people with health inequalities, getting them into the screening programme is quite important. Living well and beyond with cancer. So when patients have been through the cancer pathways and process, living onwards and beyond is really important from a physical and psychological point of view. It can affect people in very many different ways. So we are working closely with all of the independent sector providers of support to these individuals, and you can see we are looking at the quality of life metrics of those individuals going forward and supporting them in their journey. So really, this deep dive is to acknowledge, really to note the ongoing challenges. We meet weekly under Tier 1 arrangements with all leaders across the system, going through individual pathways and improvements we need to make. But hitting our performance targets at the end of the financial year, I think we need to acknowledge will be a challenge, particularly on those three tumour pathways. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mary. So I think it would be helpful, as I said earlier, given that this was considered, I think, at QRD as well. I can see Vicky wants to come, and it'd be useful just to hear from QRD about the assurance that you got when you considered the topic, and then we can take any other questions. So, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, as you say, we had a detailed discussion on this in QRD, and Matthew kindly came to QRD, and it was really helpful having system partners around the table to be able to outline some of the specific actions that are being taken, and also some of the issues that are difficult to deal with, particularly in terms of resource. So it was a really helpful discussion. But I guess the thing for me is actually how we get the connection between not just the 3 pathways that have just been outlined, but also some of the other areas that are difficult in terms of outcomes, so lung and upper GI cancers, which are more in terms of timely interventions are a challenge. So I guess it's how we continue the conversation and make sure that we give support to the provider organisations in facilitating those pathways, but particularly the outcomes from the harm reviews. And I'm not clear at the moment, Mary, perhaps how the cancer boards, their findings in terms of harm reviews, how that's going to get reported through.
Kath might want to come in on that one. Sorry, can you please say again, Vicky? I didn't quite understand the question there. Sorry.
Yeah, it was just in terms of the cancer boards and they're undertaking the harm reviews or reviewing the harm reviews. How are we going to find out as an ICB or particularly QRD what the outcomes to those reviews are? Not just across those 3 pathways, but across all of the pathways.
So my understanding with the harm reviews are done at trust level, and they go to the trust quality committees. Obviously, we have attendance at the quality committees, so we can feed back. I know that they've been pulled in now, because they were happening in separate places, but they are being pulled into a singular harm review. Now I can go back and sort of check further on that and get further detail on that if we want to review further detail on that.
I think that would be really helpful, because I think the concerns about some of the delays, particularly as Mary said over COVID, and some of the diagnostics now coming through into those pathways, it's really important that we do understand that position. So clarity on the pathway for those harm reviews and the outcomes, that would be really helpful for QRD going forward.
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Kath, for responding. I mean, I think what we need to be really well assured on is that the providers who are leading on those harm reviews have got robust processes in place to do that, and that it is identifying actions that need to be taken. So I think we need to just make sure we're finding the right balance between what the providers are doing within organisations and what assurance we seek within QRD, and probably the conversations that we're going to be having going forward with colleagues present at QRD, I think will be helpful in getting that right balance. So it's something to focus on. Jane?
I was 2 points really. There's we have to separate out in terms of harm reviews individuals who've waited longer than we would have planned to do under the standards, who we've then got a responsibility under duty of candour to inform them if their wait has affected their outcome, and we would do that under the duty of candour process. And then the other part is around what we learn from that. Are there things we could have done in the pathway? But for those, I wouldn't really limit it to 104 days. They're just at the extreme end. That for me is much more around duty of candour. It's almost everybody over 62 days. Is there more that we can learn about the pathway? And so that's really what we're focused on, and we're making some really good progress. I just asked the day before we came in, and actually our skin performance in September was 98%. So a number of things we've been planning for a long time have actually now sort of feel like they've got there with skin. So there's lots of really good work around this.
Thank you, Jane. I think there's a couple of other people wanted to come in, Sarah and then Graham.
Thank you. From conversations we've had here at board and at subcommittee, I think it's just hopefully it's a collective feeling that there is an acknowledgement that this position needs to change. We said that last time at board. There isn't any complacency there. I think that's really important for people that are waiting on the pathways to know that. I guess in the narrative of the paper, it talks about the 62 day, the 62 day greater weights. It says that we'll need longer time before we see things will look worse on our reporting before they look better, and it will take more time for urology and colorectal. I just wonder whether it would be helpful if we're able to now or for our next reporting that we have a time frame, so we as a board know when we should be expecting that downward to pick up. and then we can hold account assurance and make sure that provider colleagues have got everything they need to turn this around. So that was just that comment really on. I'm not quite sure. I appreciate I'm going to see things potentially get worse for a month or two, but for how long, and when should I start to be concerned?
Thanks, Sarah. I keep wanting to call you David, Mary. That's somewhat unfortunate because the first thing I see is David's name. Mary, so I think that's about separate clear trajectories for each area, I think is what Sarah is saying. So is that something that we can do?
Yes, yes, we are working with the regional team on that at the moment. But as I said, the initial look at it is skin. We foresee January, but that it's multifaceted. But January, the other two, it's going to be the earliest is going to be the end of March. This is for Worcestershire, the end of March. Urology is the one of the most concern, to be honest, that we've got. But we can get that. We'll bring the details to the QRD once we've signed that off with the region.
Okay, thank you, Mary. That's helpful. So, I mean, this is another area which we were very clear on that it is a performance concern. I think we're in tier 1 for cancer performance nationally. Is that right, Mary?
For Worcestershire, yes, yeah. For
Worcestershire. So clearly, it is an area of national concern and one that we need to continue to focus on. So I think it'll be reported back to QRD. So I think it was here because obviously it is an area that the board needs to be cited on. And clearly, whilst there's a lot of actions, we're not yet at the point where we can be assured that we're going to achieve the outcomes that we were seeking, which is that we would be meeting those trajectories. But we will need to take stock, and QRD can obviously take stock of where progress is once Mary's reported back. Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Krishni. Yeah, just a short question for Marie, really. I suppose with an eye on recovery, but much more looking and stepping forward into sustainability. Marie, to what extent are teams looking at using and sharing resources outside of Herefordshire and Worcestershire? Are we confining ourselves to what's in Herefordshire and Worcestershire, or are we looking to adjoining ICBs or in the region?
I'm happy to go back on that. Thanks. So there are many, and I'm sure Jane and Matthew will back this up. There are already many cancer pathways that use tertiary services, so other areas of Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Coventry, Warwick, Gloucester, other areas for part of their pathway. That's long-standing. We have been looking for mutual aid for these particular pathways for Worcestershire. I say really grateful to Herefordshire for helping with the skin pathway. We've been looking farther than around to look for urology. We cannot find anywhere that can help us with urology at the moment, and that they aren't already helping us with. And the region have actually done a search for us as well. I personally think there is more opportunity within our ICS for sustainability going forward to look at more pathway. Not all of the cancer pathways, but some of the cancer pathways. We could look at a different way of providing them to get greater access over 7 days a week. Huge change, huge transformation programme, but we know other areas of the country are doing it and seem to be having some success. So yeah, we're not limiting ourselves to our area. We are looking around, but there's not, because of the workforce challenges and the demand growing everywhere, we're not having much success at the moment.
Thank you. So I think sounds like limited opportunities, Mary, to do more than we're already doing in that respect. But you seem to be saying there's very much opportunities for transforming how we work within our system.
Yeah.
Nigel.
Yeah, just a quick one, really. It's been announced today that GP access to diagnostics is going to be increased nationally. That actually might have more of an effect in Worcestershire than Herefordshire because the rules of radiology access are different between the two counties. But has that been factored into planning, or is this going to add an extra complexity to our recovery?
No, we only saw this yesterday morning ourselves, Nigel, to be honest, and haven't heard anything about this at all. I think we need to look at it, and I think we'll bring it up Friday with our regional leaders, because
this could have a really negative impact on our capacity, could cause even more issues than we currently have. So we need to look at it more closely, in more detail, to understand the impact.
Thank you, Mary. So that's a potential risk, you think, if that's actually going to materialise. Sarah, did you want to come back in, or is that a legacy hand?
Well, no, Krishni, I guess if you'll forgive me, I don't know if there are members of the public who will or will not watch this back later, but I think or maybe watching live now, but I think I just either like you or Mary to endorse, if you agree, that if people have got symptoms of cancer, anything that they're worried about, they shouldn't listen to us talking here and feel that they don't want to bother people, or that the situation's too great and they don't want to add to our burden. If they've got any symptoms that they're worried about, then they must absolutely seek the appropriate medical attention. So seeking their GP or looking online to get advice about what to do about symptoms. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think that's a really important message that we would all support. Jane.
Picking up on that direct access to diagnostics, because we have a lot of direct access to diagnostics in Herefordshire. I think it's an opportunity more than a risk, I think I'd say. There's very good quality general practice in Worcestershire, so it feels more like an opportunity than a risk, I think.
We need to analyse it and see what the impact is.
Okay. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Mary. So I think, it's been helpful just to really reflect on this as an important priority for us to address in terms of performance at our board. Clearly, as we've already recognised, this issue has been looked at already within QRD and will no doubt continue to be scrutinised by QRD, and we will hear more about progress in these areas through the report, the System Quality Delivery and Resources report that routinely would come anyway, but it was important to make sure that the board as a whole was cited on the actions that are underway, the trajectory that we're working to at the moment. Clearly some risks and issues that we've been highlighting, and further assurance is clearly needed on whether we're actually going to achieve the outcomes we were seeking. So thank you very much, Mary. Finally, then, on paper number 12, or item number 12, which is the general report.
Krishna, you've gone on mute.
Sorry, I don't know which bit I accidentally went on. I think my mute button sort of turned itself on, I think, but anyway, I was going to say that we're now moving on to the System Quality Delivery and Resource report. We've covered quite a number of these areas, I think, as we've gone through the discussion. So can I just invite Mary to just highlight anything that you particularly wanted to draw to our attention? But I think we've covered a bit of the ambulance handover position, albeit when we were talking about flow, clearly about cancer. If there's anything you want to add, Mary, please do.
There's just a couple of things, if that's okay, Chair. So on the urgent emergency care ambulance handover delay, I just want to highlight the 4 bullet points on page 3, 2 of which we covered earlier. These are the agreed 4 priorities for Worcestershire for implementation as part of a reset of the Worcestershire urgent and emergency care system that's due to start on Monday the 21st. Really, these are priorities we've had for quite some time. We really want to focus on implementation, full implementation of those priorities to help and support the winter planning, but also to reduce the ambulance handover delays, which remain quite significant. And I've also made reference to the System Control Centre. That will be an ICS System Control Centre based here at Kirkham House, but we'll be remotely linking in with the rest of the system to support this and other, potential strike actions, any other emergency planning aspects that we have. So that I won't go into any further detail, the details of the report. I just wanted to put some positive news. Our elective recovery, we've made really good progress on general elective recovery, patients waiting over 104 weeks. We were over 400 in April, and at the end of September we are at 0 waiting over 104 weeks. That's still too long. That's still far too long for patients to wait, but it's a significant improvement. and we've reduced those waiting over 78 weeks from around 24,000 to 8,000 this month. We're still on trajectory for the end of the financial year to be at 0 waiting over 78 weeks, but we have got, just to highlight, one of the challenges is winter ahead of us and the urgent care pressures, which is a day-to-day challenge to achieving that. So whilst Worcester Acute is still categorised as Tier 1 for elective at the moment, I know that's being reviewed currently, and our hope is that will be, downgraded if we maintain the progress that we have. And indeed, we're taking the same approach now to cancer services, and to get that same rigour that we had in cancer services as we've had in elective, which showed the benefits. Just want to briefly mention service sustainability, if that's okay. So like other areas of the country post-COVID, we are having services, usually smaller services, are becoming more fragile and vulnerable, and we've had a couple of urgent situations across services where we've had to, as an ICS, support, intervene and stabilise those services again. To support this, we've got a proposed framework that's now been through the SCC this month. It's a framework to support us working with these vulnerable services and how we get the best outcomes, and it will ensure a sustained and consistent way of doing this. So we now have a list of vulnerable, fragile services. We meet monthly with the region on this, just to update them as to where we are. And we're, like other systems in the region, we're taking exactly the same approach. So through QRD, we'll bring the list of those services in future and the actions that we're taking to sustain them. So you'll see the detail.
Thank you, Mary. That's helpful, because I think that that was an important piece of learning, wasn't it, from the haematology example, yeah. And I think it's really good that we've been able to build on that. As you say, you'll take the detail to QRD. Matthew, do come in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just to reference the point about sustainability of service in the long term. Just to note that Jane and I are working closely together on how, as providers, we identify where critical mass may present some risks in terms of delivery into the future. We see this as an important provider responsibility. So obviously playing into the process that Mary articulated, but Jane and I see this as important for the providers to take a significant level of responsibility on. Just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. That's helpful. Just a question from me, Mary. Obviously, really good to the positive progress on elective you've highlighted. Is it right to, I suppose, is there a risk to elective position with industrial action, given likely prioritisation of urgent and emergency care? I mean, and I'm guessing that would be the challenge for the whole of the NHS with strike action.
I mean, Matthew and Jane might have a view, but I would think yes, it's a potential risk to our elective recovery. You know, you have to almost sweat the services 7 days a week at the moment to get, to achieve these targets. So I think if it comes to being, it will be a significant issue for us.
Thank you, Mary. Matthew, did you want to come in?
Just to I guess make the point that we don't yet know the extent of the industrial action, because we've only had one union confirm its ballot results. I think there will be a risk. I think just referring to the point in Worcestershire, obviously we've separated the majority of elective surgery capacity from emergency work. So the impact of winter we are trying to insulate ourselves against, but at this point in time there's an unknown risk associated with industrial action, which we've got our weekly task force working closely with the unions to understand as best we can what that risk will be.
Thank you, Matthew. Jane, anything to add?
I think the answer is just fundamentally yes. If there is industrial action, it will impact on elective services, because that's that's the only bit of the service it can impact on, because obviously all of the emergency services will be protected. So I think if there is action, it absolutely will affect our elective recovery plans.
Thank you, Jane. Vicky?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Mary, because obviously in QID we looked at this in some detail and we picked up some variances in the performance of urgent and emergency care at Wye Valley, but that was because ambulances have been transferred across to Hereford. And is that part during the winter pressures? Is that part of the plan that's ongoing in terms of anticipated performance over the winter?
Yes, so it's not an intentional part of the plan, Jane. It's a more reactive part of the plan. Using yesterday as an example, we did have to ask the ambulance service to divert ambulances to several hospitals away from our area because of the extensive delays. But you can see from the data that Wye Valley, although they do have some overall ambulance delays, it's not extensive. It's used tactically every day when we need it, Vicky, is what I want to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Jane?
Yeah, I mean, broadly, the numbers we're seeing at the moment are a doubling. So we've had a doubling of ambulances, a doubling of overnight admissions, and actually a doubling of length of stay of those patients from where we were pre-COVID or a year ago. So no doubt it really puts pressure on the Herefordshire system. So I mean, it's right to provide the best access to emergency care for all of the people responsible for, and so it's the right thing to do. But it's a significant concern, I think I would say.
Thank you very much, Jane. Is there any final point from you, Mary? And before, do I need to bring Mark in on this? Mark or any other members of the exec team, or you're going to pick up the finance element in item 13?
I think Kath was going to pick up some of the quality aspects.
Okay, great. So Mary, nothing else from you on this so far. So Kath?
Not much further to add, Chair, really, from obviously what's in the report. I think obviously you'll see that I'm in uniform today. I'm going up and we're doing a joint sort of quality assurance exercise with our Health and Care Trust and with the Acute Trust partners, just to work through the push model that's in place in the Acute Trust. Obviously creates pressures that are around the system, so making sure that we're balancing those risks across the system, and that's kind of all I would draw out there from that's our probably our major risk at the minute. And obviously we've discussed quite considerably the risks around Herefordshire social care services and the links within the deep dive of that. So that's as much as I would like to say at this point, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kath. And Will's name's down as well, so I don't want to sort of miss the opportunity. I know Will has left us actually, hasn't he? Because he had an appointment to go to. Okay, so I think if we're comfortable to move on, if there are no further comments on this particular report, we will move on to item 13, which is the ICB financial plan delivery, which is indeed over to Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So I will try and pick up some of the points from the last report to make sure I can cover the system position and where we're at from a system perspective, but also some of the specifics in relation to the ICB. So from a system perspective, if you remember, we had a collective plan deficit of £14.8 million. In terms of month 6, we're slightly behind that. So collectively as a system, we should be 7.9 million deficit. We're actually sitting at 11.7. It's predominantly the ICB that is driving that adverse variance linked to continuing healthcare, which we discussed previously at the last board, and we've discussed through various committees as well. In terms of from a system perspective, we are seeing continued financial pressure into agency expenditure. We're 10 million above plan at the moment, and we're also behind in terms of the recurrent efficiency programs as to where we need to be, whilst we are finding non-recurrent mitigations to deal with those. What it does mean is it puts pressure on the underlying financial position. So as we go into 23-24, we start a little bit further behind where we need to be as a result of not recurrently delivering the efficiency programmes. I just wanted to pull out a couple of bits, Chair, in terms of the implications. So we were one of 5 systems that had a deficit plan at the June submission. As a result of having a deficit plan, we have recently met with regional and national colleagues to try and understand some of the drivers and also review where we're at in year across a whole number of areas. There are a number of actions that came out of that, and what we'll do, Chair, is as we work through those actions, we'll include that in future updates here, but also to the ICS Finance Forum. But one of the key actions and requirements as a result of that meeting is we have to deliver our plan, which is a 14.8 million deficit. So there was a very clear driver there from regional and national colleagues. It is probably also worth adding, Chair, that since the report was drafted and shared, we've now had a protocol released from NHS England, which is a protocol that talks about changes to in-year revenue financial forecasts. So for systems providers that potentially want to move their financial plan, there's a whole protocol that we have to go through. From a system perspective, if the system cannot cover any trust movements, the protocol effectively gets triggered. There are a number of implications for the system if the protocol is triggered. So if we want to move from a system £14.8 million deficit, there's something called a triple lock on expenditure. Therefore, all expenditure would have to be signed off by NHS England over £100,000. So again, that's one of the implications. We'd have to have a very detailed financial recovery plan. There'd be further enhanced scrutiny by NHS England. There's implications for historic cumulative deficits, which are currently frozen. So this ICB has a £7.8 million brought forward deficit from the legacy CCGs, which is currently frozen. If we trigger the protocol, there is potential that that would have to be paid back. It's very likely it would have to be paid back. And there is also implications for the system oversight framework, which would again be reviewed for the system in terms of where we're at. So there are a number of implications linked to if we are off plan. With that in mind, Chair, we are doing a very detailed deep dive now across all partners. We've met with one trust, we're working through the other trusts and the ICB at the minute, looking at what else we can do to make sure we deliver the £14.8 million deficit and don't trigger this protocol. So we'll give further updates back to the ICB and also the committees and the Finance Forum. In relation specifically to the ICB, you'll see on enclosure 13 where we're at. We're currently behind at the moment and still at this point signalling a £6 million worth of unmitigated risk. The portfolio is shown in Appendix 1. The key areas where we've got pressure, as we talked about previously, is linked to continuing healthcare, and we're also seeing some pressures at the moment around prescribing. We've looked at all mitigations at this stage, so things like balance sheet flexibility, where we've got non-recurrent opportunities around spend not happening so far. There's a whole range of things we are looking at. The big driver still in continuing healthcare is around inflationary pressures. So I'm very interested in what the autumn statement might look like from an NHS perspective around inflationary pressures, because that is a big driver of what we're seeing in continuing healthcare at the moment. And again, that's something we're going to have to work through as we go forward. So again, Chair, just to reiterate, we still, from an ICB perspective, need to deliver £6.6 million surplus. We've got £6 million unmitigated risk at the moment. We're looking at what's the art of the possible to close that, to not trigger the protocol. We'll work through some of the risk associated around that with audit committee, but also at the same time through QRD, and also as part of our wider forum with partners around the Finance Forum. I'll stop there, Chair, and take any questions on either the system position or specifically the ICB finance position.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions or comments for Mark? Simon?
Just a little bit more context, if I can, Chair. So I had a meeting first thing this morning with other ICB chief execs in the Midlands, and I think it's fair to say there's financial pressure in every system, and the majority of other systems seem to be thinking they will not meet their plan for this year. Now, there's many reasons for that, but clearly inflation being at a lot higher level than we all planned is one of those reasons. So we all need to get behind Mark and support him to deliver our plan, which wasn't particularly well received when we submitted it. But if it turns out to be a really realistic plan, I think that reflects really well on us as a board and as an organisation. The second bit, obviously, we're all going to be watching very carefully the fiscal statement tomorrow, and what that means both for NHS organisations, but also for our two local authority partners. I'm sure Paul and Paul won't mind me saying that their positions also are under significant pressure, both in year this year, but also when we start to look at 23-24, and it is that time of the year where we are starting the planning process for next year. So it's twofold, really, making sure we deliver our commitments for this year, but also very seriously now starting to think about planning for next year. And tomorrow's information will be a critical component, I'm sure, in pulling that plan together. So just some additional context, really.
Thank you, Simon. Graham.
For the update. Out of interest, and I hadn't seen the protocol before, and it does sound draconian and really not something we want to go anywhere near. But I was interested. Is there a point where you would have to trigger it if it became necessary, as in it wouldn't be 11? Is there a period or a time when NHS England are looking for you to raise that flag if you actually had to do it? And the second question, I hate to be boring with numbers, and it's just looking at Appendix 1, the spreadsheet with dreaded numbers on it. Your report talks on the narrative about the pressures in acute mental health prescribing, CHC, but I just noted primary care co-commissioning that had quite experienced 7 million for the month 4 to 12, and an in-month worsening of position of 4 million. And I just wondered whether you had any comments around that.
Thank you, Graham. I'll come in and answer both of those. So in terms of the first point, timeline-wise, we've just reported on month 7 at the moment. They would probably be looking for a view probably around month 8. So once we've done the numbers for November, probably at the beginning of December, which is why it's critical at the moment. We're doing that deep dive and really getting underneath the skin of each organisation, risks, how do we collectively look at managing those. We would not do it in Q4, so it would probably be, if it was going to happen, probably around that time, and there would have to be discussions with the board. The board signed up to that, understand the risk, because again, this protocol, whilst, as you put it, Graham, is not a very nice protocol. It is designed effectively to make sure that we are all aware of the implications that would bring, and as a result of that, then all fully behind the recovery plan and what that would mean. So again, we're probably looking at that within the next month or so. In terms of the bits you pull out of the report, specifically co-commissioning, so this is where we had delegated commissioning in relation to the primary care element of services. That was the basket of services that was originally commissioned by NHS England. The main driver in terms of what's in those numbers is linked to the additional roles and responsibilities money and the way that we have to account for it with NHS England. So in the past, we'd have been given an allocation to effectively offset it. We now report it as the level of spend, and then the reimbursement comes through. In previous reports, we were adjusting for that. We've been told not to adjust for it. That's how they want us to report for it and account for it. So we'll make that a bit more explicit going forward, Graham. So well raised, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Just one final question from me, Mark, just on continuing healthcare. and the pressures, the particular pressures that you were citing and have cited previously about that. To what extent is that sort of relatively unique? That's probably a bit of a dichotomy to describe something as relatively unique, but I think we had a bit of a discussion last time about benchmarking with other systems, about to what extent they were having those sort of similar pressures, and you talked about the deep dive that's been done. So I just wanted to understand, Mark, whether this is kind of, there are particular issues for us distinctly from other systems, or are others also having this particular problem with continuing healthcare?
That is something we looked at, Chair, absolutely. I think Hereford and Worcestershire, for the wrong reasons, is always slightly ahead of the curve, particularly with our demography, ageing population, and the number of nursing care homes we see, particularly across our footprint. All systems are seeing a pressure to different extents, really. So we've looked at our local West Midlands partners and where they're at, and again, some of them are seeing a pressure, probably not to the same level we've seen at the moment, but are reporting going forward that they expect that pressure to get significantly higher. So again, part of the deep dive we did with NHS England looked at the benchmarking side and a lot of the actions we were taking. We've also looked at London to try and get a view from an inner city perspective, and again, they are struggling with a lot of the same pressures we see. What's different within this system is we need to do more work around our market management framework and agreeing the prices more up front that we would agree with nursing care home providers. We've agreed we'll do that joint piece of work now with both councils to try and have a system-wide view on that. That will stop a lot of the spot purchasing and the rates then that homes want to charge, knowing there's a supply and demand issue, and put us more on a framework which will give us more financial certainty. So we're hoping, Chair, off the back of this work to really drive that framework and start to get a bit more financial certainty around the pricing side, accepting there'll still be inflation challenges. We'll then have to work through the volume and the level of growth and how we start to collectively manage that on a different way.
Thank you, Mark. And is that something we think we would be in place for future, you know, the next financial year, for example, because it's not a challenge we want to be dealing with sort of on an ongoing basis?
I think it's going to be very challenging to get it in for the beginning of April, but that's not to say we won't look and pull out all the stops as to see what's the art of the possible. Again, depending on how inflation is dealt with as part of the financial statement, again, that might give us a better understanding as to how we start to deal with that going forward. But again, we're specifically talking to already the bigger providers that we work with to try and get an understanding, because there's a level of unknown still, Chair, particularly linked to the care home sector around the minimum wage, what energy costs are going to mean from April onwards. So still a lot of uncertainty. So whilst we will look at a framework that will try and put some stability, I don't think that will completely shield us from all of the pressures that the care home sector is going to start to see out there.
Thank you, Mark. So clearly some risks remain, and I think what you've told us is all the actions that are underway, including the deep dive involving partners to manage that, and I'm sure you'll keep us updated on how that's progressing. So thank you for that. I can see no other comments or questions, so we'll close that item. We have about sort of 10 or just over 10 minutes left, and we've still got a few things to get through. We've got a ICB committee chairs report and board assurance framework report, and a couple of brief approvals that I think we need to do, which are sort of fairly technical in nature. So I'll just invite Hannah in first of all for the first item of that, which is item 14. Hannah, is there anything you wanted to say about that report? And I'll also give the opportunity for chairs to comment as well, but is there anything you wanted to say in the first instance?
Thank you. No, all I wanted to say is that all our committees have met now once or twice, which means we've got set of minutes approved for each committee. So clearly the board will want to have sight of the committee operation, and the report reflects exactly that. So I think other than that, it's just anything that chairs of the particular committees want to come in and update on.
Okay, can I just invite the chairs in turn if there was anything they particularly wanted to bring to our attention that we haven't discussed already. So Vicky, I mean, please don't feel obliged, but if you do want to, you are most welcome to do that. So Vicky, anything from you?
Yeah, I think just to add that it was really welcomed that we had system partners around the table with us to help challenge us, but also ways of thinking in terms of the committee moving forward. I think we need to do a lot more system thinking, and to Jane's earlier point, ensure that we are strategically focused and system-wide focused. So I think we'll continue that critical evaluation after each meeting to make sure we distill the rest of the work that's undertaken across the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky, and I think that's a really important point and a challenge for all ICBs in trying to make sure that we're, we're adding value in our discussions and able to provide that support, and having partners in the room. I think it makes us, think about how we're solving these things together. Rather than the sort of structures we had in place perhaps before. Thank you, Vicky. Sarah, anything you wanted to add on strategic commissioning?
No, nothing in addition to what's there, thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Simon, as chair of Operational Exec Committee.
No, nothing to add, thank you, Chair.
Graham, on Audit Committee.
Yeah, thanks, Krishni. Just 30 seconds. The Audit Committee is still looking for ways to look at more system working, particularly within the sphere of internal audits, and we're going to pursue that agenda fairly aggressively. And the other thing, because it relates to the couple of papers after this, the Audit Committee has spent some time looking at the whole process of how the business board assurance framework risk registers join together and just work their way through that, and there was a high level of assurance that was being properly resourced and managed.
Thank you, Graham. And did you want to say anything? We didn't touch on it, but I know it's been mentioned in a couple of papers about the auditor. Is there anything further we wanted to say about that in addition to the report that's there?
I think Simon's report summed it up, the current situation.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. I think it was helpful to note the sort of scrutiny that the Audit Committee had given to the risk management approach and the BAF, which I think will help us with our next item, as you rightly said, Graham. So thank you for that. And David Whiteman on remuneration.
Thanks, Krishni. I think the report is self-explanatory. I would just add that we are looking through the Appointments and Remuneration Committee to find more consistency of approach across the different parts of our system as well. That's all to add. That's all I'd add to that one. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Great. So that's for information, and as I say, there's a number of those items we've considered as we've gone through, but it was a very comprehensive report. We move on then to item 15, which is the Board Assurance Framework Report. So Hannah, do you want to highlight any particular areas for us?
Okay, thank you. So this is the first submission of the new Board Assurance Framework for the ICB. So the process is explained in the covering paper, so I'm not going to go through that. Some of you will have seen the details through other committees and other meetings that you go to. So the Board Assurance Framework really just tries to bring together the priorities that we have agreed, looks at the deliverables, so the really specific outcomes we're trying to achieve in relation to each one of them, and then kind of look at the strategic risks and escalated corporate risks that sort of underpin it. We have touched upon a lot of these in the discussions today. So again, that by the nature of it, and this item kind of coming last on the agenda, a lot of the key issues we will have spoken about. But just a reassurance that obviously we have committees and forums that look at all these risks specifically. So the these are being talked about in system context or ICB specific context where the risks relate specifically to the ICB as the corporate body. So to assure the board that this is not the first time these risks will have been kind of taken somewhere, they are discussed in quite some detail in other forums, and audit committee assures the process overall. So I would just invite any questions by exceptions on any items we've not covered that people wanted to specifically inquire about.
Thank you, Hannah. David?
Yeah, thank you, Krishni. Hannah, as I look at some of them, for example, priority 1, we have current assurance as medium, target assurance as high, so yellow and green. But when we look down each individual risk, we see that the target score doesn't actually match the target level that we're looking to get to in the overall. So I'm a little confused as to how those different target scores link to each other or how they're made up.
Okay, and that's a really good question. So what we are bringing to the committee through the board assurance framework are just the escalated risks. So there will be a number of areas that are kind of, you know, lower risks, number of green risks, amber risks, but we are not bringing them to the board. The detail is available, but again, scrutinised in other committees. However, you're right to point out the assurance levels, as I think I mentioned before, we're still working our way through the exact process for setting those out. So at the moment, it is a recommendation of the executive and a moderation across all the areas, but it's not an exact science.
Thank you.
Does that help, David? I think
yes,
in process terms. So I think it's a snapshot of the view. But I think the point that Hannah makes about assurance levels, you know, it's a question that's popped up, and I know it's been discussed at committee as well. So we are going to try and fine tune that process just to be really clear what assurance we're providing, so that the board, all committees indeed of the board, are cognizant of where we think we are in terms of progress on actions and ultimately the outcomes we're seeking to achieve, because you know there's a lot of activity and action underway, and that's absolutely clear. It's just, is it actually going to deliver the results, and how confident are we that we're actually going to make the progress we need to? And I think the clarification that Hannah described we're trying to do, I think will help us achieve that as we go on. But these are all things that are to some degree or other in development as we develop as a board as well. So thank you, Hannah. I think it's a really good detailed report, and really helpful. As we noted earlier, the audit committee did report its satisfaction with the progress that we were making on the development of the BAF. So there are a couple of approvals that we now need to make, one of which I think is the ICB constitution change. Hannah, do you want to just briefly explain anything we need to understand about what we're approving here?
Yes, of course. So NHS England's legal team has reviewed the model constitution for ICBs post-establishment and just highlighted some very minor changes that all ICBs are required to implement. Now, that's not really an awful lot of optional. You know, we've got to do it. This is not something we can opt out of, but in line with the process, the ICB board does need to endorse it before it goes to NHS England for formal ratification. So there's nothing significant that would determine or have an impact on the composition of the board or the way we make decisions. It's really quite minor changes, but I'm asking for formal approval today on this.
Thank you, Hannah. So can I take it that everybody's happy to approve these technical changes, for that to be adopted, and then the revised constitution be uploaded onto the ICB's website? They are changes we're required to make in many ways, but it is important that the board approves them. So thank you for that. And then finally, item number 17. Now, as I understand it, Hannah, these are standing financial instructions we received at our inaugural meeting. We did in fact approve them, but we need to make sure the minutes clearly reflect that, rather than, we're not changing the actual SFIs themselves. It's just the fact that we did approve them that is a governance point. So anything you wanted to add to that?
Exactly that. The minutes were incorrect, unfortunately, so we should have just noted formally the approval of the SFIs, which we didn't. An internal audit have picked up on it and asked the board to retrospectively approve and minutes, something we already did do. So it's just an approval to amend the minutes
The
from
minutes,
the 1st of July.
Yeah. So we're not actually changing anything we've reviewed. We're just noting an amendment to the minute so that it adequately captures. Because it was our establishment meeting, it's important that it's accurately captured. So I take it, unless anyone objects, that we're happy to approve that. Yes, I'm seeing some nods, so thank you very much. Okay, that's noted for approval. Thank you. So we have now arrived at the end of our meeting. I make it 12:15 exactly, so that's a bit of a surprise. If I stop talking, we'll actually finish on time. But I did want to just say the next meeting is the 18th of January, so will be the new year at 9:30 a.m. and it will be through Microsoft Teams. So we look forward to welcoming members of the public and indeed board members to that meeting. I just want to say, I know we've covered a range of things, and actually to some degree, I think, you know, members of the public watching this meeting will understand and see some of the challenges we are facing. But I think, as Sarah sort of said earlier, we do want to emphasise that we're open for business and we remain, we're here to support our community. And whilst there are clearly some challenges, and I think, you know, we have to recognise that this is going to be a challenging winter, we are here to support our community, and it's important that members of the public absolutely understand that. And we will continue to do our utmost best collectively, I think, to do that. And hopefully people will have seen that in the discussions we've been having. So thank you all for your contributions today, and I'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you.